Hello students, this is a video designed to help you consider how best to understand the significance of the larger project of the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, and also specifically the prologue. When I was taught the prologue as a high school student, I thought it was a boring list that had nothing to say to me. Indeed, it is more. And I am here to give you a clue into what contextually in the time of Chaucer someone might have heard when they heard this read aloud, or read if they were reading from a hard copy. And the name of this lecture is Irony, Liquor, and Brain Juice. Reading the Canterbury Tales and its peculiar partnership of secular and faith-focused culture. This deals with, in part, why certain things are funny, if you're trying to find the funny in Chaucer. And also, it is a way for you to consider anything that may relate to how the divine was seen and interacted with by the author in this text. The first thing you're going to need to understand this is some general background information about Canterbury Cathedral and this shrine to St. Thomas Becket, or St. Thomas of Becket, depending on the text you're reading. This is a shot of Peter O'Toole and Peter Lawford in the movie Becket, which is about the unusual relationship of Henry the Second, I believe, and St. Thomas Becket during the Middle Ages. It was dangerous to stand up to the king. There was a giant argument between Henry II and Thomas Becket. Briefly, prior to Henry naming his best drinking buddy and wingman, Archbishop of Canterbury, and hence the highest authority in the Catholic Church in England, there was nothing that Henry would say or do that Thomas Becket would not sign up for and say, yay, hooray, king. Before he was bishop, an archbishop, he was the consummate courtier. He was not born of a royal family, but became very quickly the favorite best friend of the king. And the guy was such a commoner, he was literally from the neighborhood of London called Cheapside. He was from the cheap side of things, but there really is a place called Cheapside. When I say that Becket was the king's wingman, I mean when they went to a tavern and picked up hookers together, Becket held the king's beer. The king appointed Becket first chancellor in order to have tighter control over the finances of the realm, and in that role, Becket was highly reliable. He reported directly to the king, and in some degree, he got rid of a certain amount of kickbacks to lesser nobles. And so Henry was very psyched to hire this same guy to do something important with the church for him. And again, the job of Archbishop of Canterbury to this day is the head of the official state-recognized church in England. Yes, there is a Church of England today. It is not the Catholic Church, it is Protestant, it is also called Anglican. And the highest order of bishop that there is the Archbishop of Canterbury. So Becket went from wingman to archbishop, and this changed the dynamic of the relationship more than a little bit. The king expected Becket to obey him even when he was archbishop. But the thing was that the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't answer to the king. The Archbishop of the Canterbury answers in this order: first to the Pope, and then to God. The king wanted certain powers. He wanted to have the ability to make certain kinds of decisions that Thomas Becket was not. For instance, he wanted to be able to arrest priests, but that's not how it worked in the Middle Ages. The king could not put his hands and throw in prison a member of clergy without the nod of the church. And if the Pope was cool with what the member of clergy did, there was no nod. Becket would not hand over priests who committed crimes over civil trials. So if the king didn't like something the priests had done, well, tough. The Pope was the one to whom the priest had to answer, and not the king. And so, furiously, after being refused, really the first thing that ever anyone had refused him in this relationship, the king accused Becket of embezzling funds when he was chancellor, but he hadn't embezzled funds. He'd actually been a very loyal courtier. And then he accused him for eating fish, or rather eating meat on a day when you're only supposed to eat fish, impiety. And the Golden Legend was a book of saints and their lives. And to accuse someone of impiety, of eating fish on the wrong day, even though the Golden Legend presents this as a false claim from the king, it is just about the least offensive offense a priest could commit. Whoops, I ate the wrong thing on the wrong day. It was something not to do as far as the Catholic Church of the Middle Ages was considering doing this. This, by the way, is during Lent, if your church has Fish Fridays, that's why. It's this tradition that you don't eat meat on a certain day of the week. The Pope protected Becket, totally understanding that this was a fight for papal powers, not for Becket to be strictly in his own person just in charge. And the Golden Legend, again, writes what are called hagiographies, the stories of saints' lives, which are often very miraculous and let's just call them improbable. But this was a very popular book that was read by many people who could read in the Middle Ages, but more than that, it was considered authoritative. In other words, if Saint Cecilia had her throat pierced by 3 swords and still sang hymns and prayers, well, there was no way that wasn't true. Name a miracle, if it was in the Golden Legend, you were supposed to take it on face value during the Middle Ages. So the Golden Legend tells us that Henry cried out in frustration within earshot of a number of his knights. And here is what it says in older English. The king was much wroth, which means very angry, and said, if he had men in his land that loved him, they would not suffer such a traitor in his land alive. In other words, the king says, and other texts quote him as saying, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? ? He doesn't say, hey, you guys, I'm taking a hit out on the Archbishop of Canterbury, go kill him. But some people do indeed interpret it that way. And here is a picture of what happens. The king's knights, a few of them at least, go to Canterbury, and while he is celebrating Mass, they stab him and they kill him in the sanctuary of the cathedral. Such a desecration of the temple, it's not even funny. And to this day, you cannot bring in the Catholic Church a weapon inside, unless there is some kind of renegade Texan Catholic Church I don't know about. I can tell you that I was a maid of honor at a wedding in France, and the groomsmen were members of they were essentially at the equivalent of West Point for France, and their uniform included swords. For dress uniform, they wore swords, and the priest would not perform the wedding ceremony and told them to take their swords and leave them on the steps of the church, because that, since Thomas of Becket was killed there, is the rule. No sacred ritual can be performed within the walls of the Catholic Church where there are weapons present. He who lives by the sword, as Jesus says in the red letters of my Bible, dies by the sword. So again, this tells you the story, and here's another illumination. This story was very popular to illuminate, meaning to draw in pictures in the Middle Ages and manuscripts and books. 4 knights, feeling certain they had orders from the king, killed Becket. They really thought that when the king said in a rhetorical question, "Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?" that was an order from the king. And were they wrong? I leave it to you to decide. And here is what one medieval eyewitness says. He was a cleric or a clerk wounded in the attack. He describes it talking about Becket's head. The crown of his head was separated in such a way that the blood white with the brain, and the brain no less red from the blood, dyed the floor of the cathedral. So there is blood spatter and brain spatter on the floor of the cathedral. Well, the Middle Ages believes that if somebody's body's holy because they're saintly, that you save it. Eesh. So Thomas Becket was almost immediately declared a holy martyr, because he was, after all, only in the fight with the king, who he never had a fight with before, in defense of the Pope and the Pope's authority. And he was recognized by the English people as a saint almost immediately, within months of his death, at the hands of people that thought they were sent by the king, whether they were or not. And because this is the way that people throughout rather they thought about the sainthood during the Middle Ages, they put the brain and blood of Becket in this box. This box is in Canterbury Cathedral. You can go see it. Regularly adding water to it to keep it moist. Let me explain this. It's really yucky, but there's a kind of primitive medieval thinking or ancient world thinking logic to it. One of the things that you do in the Middle Ages, I don't honestly believe the church does this anymore, but I could be wrong. I'm not a bishop or a cardinal trying to figure out if someone's a saint. But you believe that the body will be, at least in part, incorruptible and will last in a supernatural way longer than nature would normally allow a body to last. For instance, I have seen a relic which contains the tongue of St. Francis of Assisi. There is a tongue in a golden box. I have not seen it myself, the tongue. I've seen the box. And people come because they are praying for a kind of benefit that they believe that getting the agreement of the saint about before God will help them have. There are a variety of things that people do within the Catholic Church that are like this. For instance, St. Christopher is supposed to be someone who protects one from in travel. And while not all travelers go to the shrine of St. Christopher and his relics, meaning parts of his body that have been preserved, nevertheless, people will wear a St. Christopher's medal. And it's a way of saying, hey, Brother Christopher, will you please watch out for me while I travel around? You may know someone who has a St. Christopher's medal, and that's what that's kind of about. And so what would people do? Well, in order to try to get close to God, remember that Protestants have this idea that in answer to the question, where is God? God is everywhere. Well, so great. You don't really need to go to a shrine in order to get snuggled up to God. You just need to pray. And you don't need a priest if you are a Protestant, according to the thinking of Protestants. You just have this belief that you can talk to God because you are saved. Well, the Catholic Church doesn't really regard these matters in the same way at all. And if you needed some kind of special favor from God, whether it was a prayer you really, really wanted answered about somebody's health or some other thing, you really might want to go, not just pray wherever you were to God about the thing that was close to your heart. You really might want to go visit the shrine of the saint who was overseeing the matters associated with you. It became very quickly the thought in England that St. Thomas was the patron saint of people from the working class and peasants in England, that he was their patron saint, the way that people generally believe that Joan of Arc is the patron saint both of France and of New Orleans. In other words, if you believe in the veneration of the saints, as it's called in the Catholic Church, and you wanted to ask a New Orleans related matter, you might very well pray asking for the agreement of St. Joan of Arc related to the matter at hand. Likewise, we have this very similar thought about Becket, and particularly about ordinary people. If you weren't a king might not pray to Thomas Becket for a boon, the agreement for a boon from God, because after all, Thomas Becket had said no to the king. But in saying no to the king, peasants, I believe wrongly, thought that he was saying yes to the peasants. But so, all right, you've got the brain and a bunch of water in a box. And this is a picture of a very small ampule that is made out of lead. And if you went there and you wanted to cure a thing and you wanted to be healthy or you wanted to be close to the saint, people would drink some of the brain juice out of the box that you would get in one of these little lead ampoules. Just to begin with, I don't care if you're drinking, grape juice out of one of these things. Don't drink out of a lead cup. You could get lead poisoning. But on top of that, drinking centuries-old brain juice sounds like it's ill-advised to me. I'm not a doctor, but ew. Anyway, the Golden Legend reports, quote, "The Pope thanked God that our blessed Lord hath shown many miracles by the veneration of Becket. The blind have recovered their sight, the dumb their speech, and the deaf their hearing, the lame their limbs." So it was widely believed in England in particular, but not exclusively in England, that if you went and drank some of this brain juice, a lot of good stuff could happen. And what's described here is not particularly specific to one kind of blessing. It's kind of an overall, you showed up and a good thing happened. So let's say you have your sight and you can speak and you're not deaf and you're not lame. You might just drink it anyway because some other good thing that you've been praying for could happen. And so this is a picture of Canterbury Cathedral, and it became a very popular site for pilgrimage. Pilgrimage, of course, is when people go to a particular site because they believe they can get closer to God there. And Today, again, I think most Catholics would tell you that you could pray to God in any part of the world or in space, and God could hear you, and that would just be a testament to your faith, that faith connects us to God rather than a journey per se. The medieval world was very, very um, material in its thinking about how God would manifest himself. Um, I'll give you an example. If you have ever heard the beautiful Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, as it's sometimes called, from the Bible, which is a series of love poems that's essentially recited between a man and a male figure and a female figure. Bernard of Clairvaux, a saint from the Middle Ages who was really good at reading the Bible, quite frankly. I happen to love his book on loving God. To this day, I find it relevant, although I don't drink brain juice on pilgrimage. Um, Believed that this was a song. The Song of Solomon's described a couple, and the couple was Christ and his church. God and his faithful, Christ and his church. But in the Victorian era, that was understood then as is all just one big metaphor. Well, Bernard of Clairvaux's generation didn't see it as metaphorical. They figured, okay, Christ has a bride. The bride is the church. There's got to be a wedding day and a honeymoon. There were women mystics who had zero trouble from the church imagining that as the glorious church, which is female, they were having sex with Jesus. This idea was not offensive to the church because of the belief that Christ is coming back for his glorious bride, and that he's the bridegroom in much of the language of the New Testament. So divine intervention, as it were, would come in the form of a wedding night. For the medieval mind, it was much more literal than it is for most people today. And so people would go on pilgrimage to get close to God through the tongue of a saint, the finger bone of a saint, the foot bone of a saint. They would go and venerate the saint in order to have God hear their prayer and answer it affirmatively. So Thomas Becket dies in 1170 AD. And it's about 200 years later, Chaucer begins to write the Canterbury Tales about people going on pilgrimage to Becket's shrine. And I want to generally talk about pilgrimages in the Middle Ages. I've said a few things. Oh, wait a minute. That doesn't look like a pilgrimage exactly. Let's have one more try. This PowerPoint may have just been hacked. Let's try. All right, about pilgrimages of the Middle Ages. Oh my God, does this look like a holy journey to Jerusalem or Canterbury? Maybe not. Actually, that wasn't a hack, and you aren't getting punked. Chaucer writes in surprising ways about holy pilgrimages, so much so that we are more on a spring break than we are on a religious journey in the Canterbury Tales. Yes, you heard me right. The holy pilgrimage is not at all humorless, dry, or sexless. It is, frankly, a place where there are wild things going on as well as prayerful things. Um, all right, on Chaucer's pilgrimage, I say we are going both here. This is Canterbury Cathedral and its current clerics. And here, this rave. And this will seem self-evident, but just because it's a really old piece of writing, don't think for a minute that it isn't trying to be funny, ridiculous, or I say even redunculous. Chaucer wants you to laugh. He isn't saying, "Oh Lord Jesus, 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 Jesus." That's not the text. So here is why Chaucer's pilgrimage is not exactly holier than thou. First, it starts at the Tabard, which is an inn located in its district known as for its prostitution. Um, it would be as if I started my pilgrimage to the holy shrine in a wild rave place in Vegas. So I say a few snarky things here. Get a start on your trip to the shrine of the martyr. Get a beer. Get a hooker. That really is kind of his vision. The other part that makes it not super holy is we never actually make it to Canterbury Cathedral. He talks about the stories people tell along the way, but he never takes us into the cathedral itself, ever. Our pilgrimage is therefore to the people we meet along the way, which in a way is much more relatable than a divine mystery, which is perhaps holy, but ultimately inscrutable. Our pilgrimage is to the stories they tell. I'm an English teacher. Of course, I love that. Stories. We're on pilgrimage to stories. English teachers totally dig that. And there's a contest for who can tell the best story. They're going to have two elements by which they will be judged. First, best sentence in the Middle English, most edifying meaning, and most solace. Solace means it's like the most entertaining, and that could include things that were in no way polite entertainment, as you will see. All right, this is the very beginning of the Canterbury Tales, and I'm going to first read it to you in the Middle English, and then I'm going to read it to you in sort of an approximation of one translation of modern English off the top of my head. One that April with its shore sote, when April with its sweet showers, the drought of March hath pierced to the root, the drought of March has pierced to the root, and bathed every vein in switch liquor, and has bathed every vein in such liquor, of which virtue engendred is the flower, which of which virtue makes the flowers blossom. One Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath, when zephyr breezes with their sweet breath. Inspired hath in every holt and heath, inspired has in every holt and heath, which is basically in every house and field. The tender croppes and the young son, the tender crops and the young son, hath in the ram his half course run, has in Aries, basically, is what he's saying. In other words, in the spring months, his course half run, right smack in the middle of spring. And small fools maken melody, and little birds make melody, that slepen all the night with open eye, that sleep all night with open eyes. Notice above this, the small fowls making melody that sleep at night, basically is what he's implying, like the nightingale, but also he uses that later, we're going to see, as a metaphor for having sex. So pricketh natura in her courages, So nature pricks is with its fancies, I guess is another way to put it, or its manner. Then longen folk to go on pilgrimages. Then people long to go on holy pilgrimages. Ba-dum-bum. So, all right. Really, Chaucer? Really? What do you remember about springtime and being young? All right. Let me go through this a bit. Would young people in springtime rather go here, Canterbury Cathedral or a cathedral trip, or here? Would they rather go on spring break? Seriously? Chaucer realizes that most people prefer having noisy fun when spring is in the air. He he means this phrase, folks long to go on pilgrimages, because all right, he is talking about there is like, the birds are singing and it's nice out. It's been cold and wet and now the everything's in flower and it's just like spring is in the air. What do people want to do? They want to go to a shrine where there are the relics of a dead guy who might have been super holy, but he's super dead. Um, that is not a springtime desire in a general sense to go pray quietly in some dusty room. So here is the box of brains, another joke that's in this basic beginning. It also contains the Canterbury Tales second joke. All right. These are the images of drinking brain juice here. One that April with his showers. When April showers, the drought of March has parted to the root. The drought of March has pierced to the root, and hath bathed every vein in such liquor, and has bathed every vein in such liquor. So, okay, we have sweet showers that come after March, and we have liquor, brain juice drinking. So, many scholars ask this question: is Chaucer making fun of the ways that the medieval pilgrims venerate saints? And when you read the Pardoner's Tale, which we are going to read, you will see that the answer to this question is more richly fleshed out, and he starts winking at us about religious practices in the very first stanza of the poem. And so the third class of joke of the Canterbury Tales is found in examining the pilgrims themselves. Almost all of them are hypocrites. You know who's funny to laugh at? Hypocrites. And how could I possibly know this? How can you know this, Professor Babson? Were you there on pilgrimage? Well, I'm old, but I'm not that old. All right, but I am this old. I used to watch a show. The woman in the white jacket is named Joan Rivers. She used to be super funny. Now she is deceased. And she had a show called Fashion Police on the E! Network where she would make fun of the way people dressed. She would say really hilarious but really mean things about the way celebrities dressed. And when you read the general prologue, be fiercer than Joan Rivers on the Fashion Police. In other words, be a judge on the show Drag Race. I mean, really, just look for what's wrong with the outfit. All right, here are some hypocrites. The knight. I mean, you start to read and it just sounds like it's just this regular story. It sounds like he was at a lot of battles, right? Um, but his mail coat is rusty. Do you know what rusts? Something you put away in storage, not that you're out there using. How could you rust your armor from lack of use if you were in battle a lot? Hypocrite. The monk. All right, the monk. He's not so much a monastic figure as a spastic figure. He most loved venery, it says on line 166. And that means both hunting, which is what its surface meaning is, but skirt chasing. Like there's another piece of writing from the Middle Ages called the Hunting Bargain in Sir Gawain of the Green Knight, where basically you take these men talk about hunting and hunting women, hunting like animals you're going to kill and eat, to hunting women that you're going to get with. I'll put it that way, in the same breath. And it says this. And Chaucer is more than aware of the double entendre that is still there. He is, in line 189, a fine, hard pricking spursman. Yes, that's what it means. The monk likes to chase not so much deer. Maybe he likes to hunt something else. All right, so here we have more or less a portrait of someone who has a general appearance not entirely unlike the prioress. This is a painting of a medieval woman. I happen to think she's quite lovely, and sort of surprising looking, surprisingly modern, I find. But so the prioress, who is in charge of a convent normally, at first glance just seems like a nice lady. But she gets a nickname that holy prioresses don't get, Madame Eglantine, which suggests she's a little flirty. Madame Eglantine is a kind of flower. You know, that's like calling someone Miss Saffron instead of Saint Cecilia. It's a little strange. Also, check out her nasal singing, her extremely fastidious manners, and her affected French. And she keeps little dogs. Think of Elle Wood's dog, Bruiser and Legally Blonde. She's got a lap dog. She speaks French like she went to finishing school. And she seems more concerned about them than with people, which is not what a super holy nun is supposed to do. Although I sympathize. I love my dog. And lastly, she has a fair, broad forehead. And this is a painting of a female court to the right, and this is court fashion. Nuns are supposed to cover their hair, but this is a kind of a flirty outfit. I mean, I could imagine this walking down the runway, more or less, especially with that fabulous red belt. I mean, you could totally imagine someone being part of the fall collection in this. It's not quite nun-like. But there is one non-hypocrite, and that's the parson. What Chaucer says about it is, this noble ensample to his shape he yaff, that first he wrought and afterward he taught, which means first he acted and then he taught what he had done. So he lived out, he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk, is basically what Chaucer is saying. If he is in favor of something, he does it himself. If he's against something, he avoids doing it himself. So he's not a hypocrite, but the fact that he stands out should let us know that we're going with some people who are perhaps less committed to holiness than this guy. And here's how he explains his choices. If gold rust, what shall Iren do? For if a priest be fool, on whom we trust, no wonder is a lewd man to rust. So he's saying, if priests can't be better at keeping themselves holy than your average Joe, what's the average guy to do? If a priest is foul, who we trust, a man who is here lewd man, it can mean lewd in the way that we mean it here, but a guy who isn't like in a priestly order, who hasn't taken vows, he could screw up too. So the parson is not messing around. He is there. He's on an actual holy pilgrimage. His presence here makes the other clerics look laughable. Like if you're there for a hunting trip and not for Jesus, you're not exactly super churchy. And rot. It's the difference between rot and tot that Chaucer primarily uses for humor in the Canterbury Tales. The people claim to believe or think a certain thing, and then they act a totally different way. And their very presence on pilgrimage suggests they're seeking holiness, but it doesn't seem like they all really are. Most of the characters, and notice that he himself is one of the characters, don't practice what they preach. And we are supposed to understand the irony of that, and we're supposed to laugh at it. And so these hypocrisies are what kind of drive the stories of the Canterbury Tales. He uses what's called a framed narrative. A framed narrative is a thing you'll see repeatedly in literature in a variety of ways. Okay, on the outer frame of this tale, we have all of us who have ever read the tale. In other words, you and me, 21st century readers. We read this. We're outside of this medieval pilgrimage tale, obviously. Then we have next beyond us, the person who is telling us about this pilgrimage, Chaucer, who is both author and character. He's on the pilgrimage and he's also recounting the events that happen on the pilgrimage. And then there is, for each character, a prologue and a tale. So in each, like for instance, we are going to read the miller's prologue and tale. First, in the prologue, we get to figure out who the miller is. And then the tale is also informed by the kind of tale a guy like the miller would tell because he thought it was a really good story. So we have all of these different layers. We are distanced from whatever that tale is doing in multiple layers. And I would put it to you that it matters. We form the outer frame, and that means that we are also implicated in the stories because we might just be hypocrites too. How are we? Are we hypocrites? The teller of the tales are ridiculous. How about us? I can promise you I am ridiculous. Do we need to make a pilgrimage to repent? But if we went on that pilgrimage, might we also do more things along the way that would make us need to repent? In other words, can your holy trip be sin-free? Chaucer doesn't seem to think it's possible. We might need a miracle in order to stop being absurd. Maybe we should check out the brain juice. I mean, do they? Do they really have any left over? All of us might need to go with Chaucer on this holy pilgrimage of the spring break variety. That's it. That's my presentation.